Good morning and welcome back to Simple C10. Thanks for tuning in. On the last episode, we installed the Tenworks Fabrications trailing arm cross member, and that thing turned out awesome. If you didn't get to check out that video, go back and watch it. I love that cross member, love the design, super easy to install. A little bit hard grinding out all those rivets if you don't have the exact tools you need, but we got it done. On today's episode, we're getting the rear frame ready to install our step notch and to begin making progress bagging the back of this truck. So it's going to be a bunch of grinding, cutting out cross members. I'll share a little bit about the process that I take to remove them. I've removed quite a few now, so there is a process that I follow of cutting them down and grinding off the rivets, and depending on what tools you have, you may do it differently, but this is how I do it. Once we get the rear cross members cut out and removed, we can mock up our Velaworks step notch. And then from the step notch, we cut out the middle of the frame, we reinstall the trailing arms, we bolt in the bags, we get ready for Alex V. Watts link, and then things are going to progress pretty quickly. After that, we got to relocate the shocks, the rear cross member, and get everything locked in to install our EFI gas tank. You got to do a bunch of dirty work before you get to installing the new parts. But once we get everything cleaned up and ready and installed, it's going to turn out awesome. I'm really excited about it. So let's get to it. Before we start cutting and grinding on the back of this truck, I do want to present what my friend Zach at RS Restorations has designed. It's a brand new product. It's available on my website, simpleC10.co, but let me show you. Check this thing out. This is a air-safe emergency support kit, and this is from RS Restoration. Zach designed this whenever he was building the step side blue truck that he was bagging. The owner wanted something that was going to stop the truck from laying all the way out in case of an emergency, so he developed this air-safe bracket. This is going to bolt in to your upper bag bracket, and then the bump stop just goes in and fits in with a pin. You can pull the pin out and remove this at any time and the truck will still lay out. Or if you break down on the side of the road, or if you're going on a long road trip, you can install this in, install the clip just like that right there. And if something happens on the way, then you're not dragging the ground. Or if you break down, you can jack the truck up a little bit and install this bump stop and be able to limp it home or get it onto a tow truck. If you don't have this kit installed on your upper bag brackets and something goes wrong, you're just going to be sitting on the side of the road. I've installed these on Francis, and I'm so glad that I have them. I just leave this bracket bolted in, and I have these in my glove box. So if something happens, I'll grab them out of the glove box, jack up the truck, and then pop them in. And that's it. This is a great upgrade and just a peace of mind if you have a bag truck. Of course, everybody tries to build their truck to the highest quality possible, but the reality is with air ride, with the unknowns of the road conditions, situations can happen. Why not just spend a little bit of money and have an air-safe emergency support kit in your truck and ready to go in case that happens? The AirSafe Emergency Support Kit comes with some detailed instructions. Zach always does a great job when it comes to the details. You can click this link right here and that'll take you to the product page. There's a video on there where Zach explains step by step how to install it, and it'll answer all the questions that you may have. But hey, check this out, purchase it, install it on your truck, and not have to worry in case of emergency situation. Let's get back to business on Lucky. Here's the stuff that I'm going to be using today to cut out the rear cross members and to get it ready for the Velaworks step notch. I've got my Sawzall. This is my newest purchase from Milwaukee. I'm becoming a Milwaukee fanboy if you can't tell from the dent and ding toolbox that I bought. This thing works great. These batteries, this cut through that cross member, no trouble whatsoever. This is a great tool. I always have my handy dandy angle grinder. I use this for almost every single thing on this truck. Yes, DeWalt, I'll eventually upgrade, but this one, there's no reason to upgrade. This thing has lasted like 5 years and 10 builds. This thing is solid, so I'm gonna keep going with it. I bought a bunch of flapper wheels because as you saw on the crossmember video, these flapper wheels on a 36 or a 40 grit will eat right through those rivets. So my plan is to eat through the rivets and then smack the cross members and get them to pop out without a bunch of grinding and all that kind of stuff. Before we start cutting and grinding on this truck, I wanted to ask you guys a question. If you could see me do any type of build in the future, what would you want me to do? Square body, autocross truck, a 67 to 72, an OBS? What would you like me to do? I love sticking with the 63 to 66 trucks. I really love those, but I'd like to do something different next. So give me some feedback. I'd love to see what you would like to do and see if I can make it happen. Hey, take a second and hop in the comments and let me know what you would like my next build to be. Thanks. Quick run through in case you've never done this before. In order for us to install our Velaworks step notch, we're going to have to remove this cross member and this cross member. In some cases, you can leave this cross member if you notch out the notch to weld in right here. But in our case, we've got the Watts link right here. So this needs removed because I've got to put the EFI gas tank and then the Watts link right here. So this is going to be in the way. The best method that I've found to remove this stuff is I'll use an angle grinder and I will cut out first this bump stop bracket. That way I can get to the rivets, and then I'll use the 36 flapper disc to grind down those rivets and then pop them out with a hammer and a punch. And then on these, I'm just going to grind down all the heads of these rivets on the top and the bottom, and then use a pry right here just to pry it up just enough to use a hammer to knock this out all in one piece. If this is really tight whenever we go to get it out, you can just cut it right here with the Sawzall and it'll just fall out. So that is one way that we can do it. Same way with this. This is pretty easy to uninstall, but over here where the shock bracket is, sometimes we got to do some cutting there to get to all the rivets and everything. So as I go through each piece, I'll kind of break down of what to do. It's pretty self-explanatory. You're grinding out the rivets and then popping off the cross member, but it does take some work. This is not easy. Grinding for probably an hour and a half. I'll be sitting here grinding and just hammering to get these cross members out. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. Once these cross members are out, then basically we get to install the notch, put the trailing arms on there, start installing the bags. Things really start to get fun when we get these cross members out of here. Once I get the notch installed and I weld in the bridge that connects the notch, that will kind of solidify the frame back together the way that it was. And then we will remove the spare tire bracket after that. I'm going to leave it in here right now just because that will be an extra support while I get these two out. Whenever I'm doing this, I like all the weight to be on the front of the truck with the cribs and the jack stands and everything as safe as you can have it set up. That way this is kind of freely hanging. There's not a lot of weight on it. You never want to have your jack stands back here whenever you're cutting these things out because then it could try to bend or warp or anything. So the less weight that is on this rear section, the better. This is my basic setup. I have the couple jack stands here right where the body mounts are, then the wood cribs in the middle of the frame with some pressure on them from the frame. And then on the front, I have some jack stands on the very front of the frame as well. So that's worked well for me. With anything that you do, there's a million different ways that you can do it. With the limited amount of tools and stuff that I have, an angle grinder and a Sawzall and a hammer works good for me. But if you have an air hammer, if you've got a big compressor, if you've got a plasma, there's a lot of other tools that could really knock this out in no time. But again, I'm here to show you kind of the basic way to do it because I don't have the tools. Hopefully I'll upgrade those in the future, but right now it's worked for me. It's a little bit more work, but we'll get it knocked out. As you saw, I ground down all the rivets on top and the ones on the bottom. And then when you hit it with a hammer, since your cross member is kind of like this on the frame, when you hit it, it drops down. That's one trick. I'm going to hit the other side and then twist this thing out, and then we'll just hit the rivets on the bottom side of the frame, and this thing will be out of here. Like that right there. We've got all the cross members removed. Now it's time to clean the frame and get ready to install this Velaworks step notch. So throughout the install, I will reference a couple different holes. The first holes I'll reference are these top frame holes from the rivets that we removed. Those are a good kind of guide to go by as you install the notch. The other reference is these 3 holes in the frame here from the bump stop. Ideally, you want your notch centered with where the bump stop bracket is, because from the factory, that's where your rear end went and hit the bump stop, so that's about centered. But we want a balance of centered here and then about an inch back from where this hole is. But I'll go all into detail whenever we get ready to mock up the step notch here in a little bit. But I've got one side of the step notch here just to kind of show you. This is about where it would go right here. So I know I need to clean the frame all around these areas from those top 2 holes all the way back to about right here, this whole section. We will need to trim a little of the frame, but we want to grind down and get all the dirt off of it. That way when we go to tack this up, we don't have any dirt in our welds. Alright, it's almost time to install our notch, but first I wanted to break down what comes in the Velaworks step notch kit. It's an 8-piece kit, which means both sides will have 4 pieces, your 2 side pieces, your bottom piece, and then the cap piece right here. And this is a little bit different than any of the other notches that you see. Usually they're a 16-piece, but what I really like about it is this top cap piece right here. Whenever you get ready to put it on, it gives it a really nice finished look on the top of your notch. If you're not familiar with these notches, they call these a step notch because, as you can see in the notch, it kind of steps up, because on the rear of these frames it's not exactly straight. It steps in just a little bit toward the back of the truck. So that's what this is for. The pieces will line up so you'll know what side goes on which, and then the frame, they'll only line up one way, but I'll show you that in just a little bit. The process that I like to use is go ahead and tack up the outside piece where you want it, and then we will clamp in the inside piece and make sure everything is level, and then we'll tack in the inside piece. Then we'll do our cap, and then we'll cut out the center where the frame is, and we'll slide in the bottom piece and then weld in that piece. But I'll show you step by step now. We'll go ahead and get the welder set up and get this notch tacked into place. Let's get started installing this notch. And as I mentioned before, usually I'll go an inch back from the furthest hole back. So you can use this front as a guide right here, and usually from the bottom of this all the way to the back of the hole right here is 13.5. So what I want to do is go to 14.5 and make a mark. Just make a mark right there at 14.5. This is going to help us know exactly where to put the front edge of the notch. We're going to line up with the front edge of the notch where it crosses right here. We'll do the same thing on the other side. There we go. That's going to be our first measurement. That's the front of the notch. We want the front of this notch to be level with that mark where it crosses the frame. So right here, right where that notch crosses the frame, that's where I want it. Last time I installed this notch, I just lined up the notch with the bottom of the frame, but whenever you go to mount this on the inside, it left a gap on the bottom on the inside of the frame that I had to fill. I don't want to do that this time. You actually don't need the full notch. So what I'm going to do is have the notch stick below the frame just a little bit, and then we can trim it off later on. That way I can mount this on the inside, have it drop below the frame just a little bit so I have something to weld to and I'm not filling a gap. We'll level out both sides and make it even, but that'll make sure we can weld it easier this time and everything is solid and not having to fill any gaps with weld. Quick peek here. It took me a minute to figure out the best way to do this, but because the inside of these frames are hollow, it's hard to get a clamp to clamp that way. So if you just use your long piece and clamp it in here, it holds it into place. And I've just barely got it sticking below the frame here and there, and the same on that side. On the bottom it's pretty much flush, but on the inside it drops down because that's where the gap is. Usually the gap is right here on the frame. If this were to be sitting here, there'd be a gap. So by sticking it down, I can tack this all into place, weld it in, and then cut this level with the bottom of the frame. And then on the inside of the frame, it's going to be level and there's no gap to fill. Some people ask if you can do the notch lower, and you can. You could probably get, 3 more inches lower, but it's not going to give you any more room with the raised bed floor if you're doing it the way the do-it-yourself bolt-in bed floor is that I've done. It's not going to save you anymore because you put it on the ledge, so the ledge is always going to be about level with the top of that notch where it's at now. You could do it smaller and try to drop your bed floor down, but you can't follow my do-it-yourself bed floor video if you plan on doing it like that. All right, this side is clamped in. What I'm going to do is go ahead and tack that into place and then mount the inside and make sure it's level. We'll trim the pieces and we'll begin to weld this side in. Whenever you go to tack these in, a tip that's been taught to me is tack them in at the very edges. That way when you do your bead, whenever you're welding it, you go from tack to tack and it's not in the middle of your weld. That way it's less noticeable. So what you'll see me do is just tack them in on the very edges at every edge that I can get them. And then I will go through and do the same thing on the inside. And whenever we get ready to fully weld it, we'll go from edge to edge and lock it in. I got those tacked in there. I tacked in behind as well just to lock it in, but those look good. I think I've got my welder set to a good setting. It seemed to penetrate well, so that's good. Again, I'm not a pro welder here. I've got some experience now that I've built up over doing the past couple of trucks. But every time I go to weld, I always practice on a random piece of metal and get my welder locked in. And last time I welded was in the winter, so the temperature was really far off and it kind of messed me up. Now it is feeling like spring today, so I'm really thankful for that. Snow on the ground a couple weeks ago. There we go. That feels good. Now it is putting the inside notch in, and we're going to measure and make sure everything is the same gap. Sometimes you have to trim out the inside of the frame a little bit to make sure the notch is the right width apart. But let's do that now, and I'll show you kind of what I do and talk you through the steps. Kind of the same way that I did the outside, I'm going to do the inside. I'll drop it below the frame, and then I'll just kind of clamp it in and then adjust it to make sure everything's level. I'll put a level on the top of here to make sure. I can measure the gap in the notch and go ahead and trim the cap piece and use the cap piece as a guide of, do I have the right width and everything. What I'm doing is seeing if anything keeps this width different. And as you can see right here, there's a little bit of the frame that needs ground down. So I'm going to mark that with the marker. Right here should be the same all the way down. So this is where you'll want to do the most of your measurements to make sure everything aligns correctly. And you might have to take this back piece off and grind it down. I know a good way is to measure right here and see what your distance is, and just measure all the way through, and if anything is wider than this measurement right here, trim it down. 3 3/8. So this looks good right here. Once we get the frame trimmed a little bit right there, then we should be good to go and go ahead and do some more measurements. I'm going to put the cap on here before I tack it. What I want to do, usually what I'll do is this, and I'll measure this gap and I'll cut down the cap a little bit by a little bit so I can set it on there and use the cap as a guide of if everything is level. I'm going to go ahead and get an idea of how much I'm going to have to cut off. That's right at 1.5. So if I cut 1.5 off of both sides, it should put me very close to where I should be. I'm going to go ahead and trim the frame and get this side piece bolted back in. We'll do one more measurement. We'll cut down the cap and set it on there, make sure everything lines up well, and then we'll lock this thing in. Measure. That's why I didn't tack in the back yet. You can see that the back has a gap right here. So what we're going to do is adjust this notch up just a little bit where it lines up with everything else. There we go. That looks good. I'll probably just trim this edge a little bit because I feel like it's a little bit off. All right, so what I'm getting ready to do, the cap is kind of just sitting on there, but what I'm gonna do is get it lined up, just a little bit of an overhang. You can cut this down to the size that you want to make it perfect. I actually like a little bit of an overhang, that way my weld can penetrate on both sides right there. I just like how it looks. But you can, if you wanted to, just scoot this to the very edge and measure how much of a hangover you have on the back side, and then just cut this. So I'm going to split the difference on here and just tack it into place on this side. Then I'll go around to the back side and then tack it in, and then I'll weld it all in. All right, so I've got the front mounted where I want, and then you can see on the back here, there's a little bit of a lip hanging over. That's kind of how the design is. I've decided that I'm just gonna tack those in, and then I'm gonna come through with an angle grinder and cut off the lip. All right, we got the notch welded in. I've got it welded in on the bottom, on the back side, on the sides, and then the top piece is all welded on. Now it's time to just make a mark and then cut out this middle section. And once the middle section gets cut out, we can put on the bottom piece. And that's going to slide into the gap, and then we'll tack it into place and weld it in just like the rest of the notch. Once the whole notch is welded into place, we'll go back and we'll trim the little excess pieces that are sticking below the frame, and we'll clean it up, and then we'll move on to the other side. Now all we're going to do is take a flapper disc and then smooth out all the edges to get the frame even with the inside of the notch. That way the little filler part on the bottom lines up nicely, and we can tack that into place. To finish up this side, I'm going to weld in this bottom piece. I'm going to clamp it in from the top here and then just tack it into place everywhere that I want it, and then we'll weld it in once everything lines up. On this side, I'm going to do it a little bit different. I went ahead and marked the excess here. I'm going to go ahead and cut that off. That way, whenever I weld, I can weld directly to the frame. On the other side, I welded it on the bottom, then had to cut it, and then I had to weld it again. So I'm trying to save myself a little bit of work by go ahead and cutting the excess and then welding it on, then putting the cap on and welding it all in here. right, there we go. We got the notch installed. Now it's time. I'm going to use some of this rust reformer and just go over the whole frame. I'm not going to worry about this cross member and this cross member. Those are both going to come out once I get the bridge done. If you're wondering why I'm painting it before the bridge, I just like to go ahead and put a coat of spray paint on there. That way it doesn't rust, and it gives me kind of the final look that I'm going for, and then we'll wait for the bridge. I might go ahead and install the TenWorks trailing arms on there and get my rear bags mounted up on the bottom there as I wait for the bridge. All the rust restore is dry and we're ready to apply our truck bed coating. This stuff is awesome. I use it on a lot of my builds on the rear frame. I like the textured finish. It kind of has a matte finish so it doesn't show all the imperfections. But this is what I'm going to use to coat from the cab back, and it's going to look really good. Here's a final result. Looks good. Love this truck bed coating. It gives it a nice little textured finish. Now all we have left is to get the bridge, weld the bridge in, mount up the TenWorks trailing arms, and get the bags mounted up here, drill some holes for the bags. I'll go through that. I actually realized I don't have any videos that show me mounting the bag to the bottom of the frame on the Velaworks step notch. I have it on the KP components, but it's a little bit different because you take that bottom cap off of there. So I will make sure to go step by step on how to mount your airbag. I've also thought about coming up with a template for the top of the bag that you put up against your frame to drill your holes. That helps you know what angle to put the bag in and everything like that. If you think that would be helpful, post in the comments to make the airbag template, and that might be something that I have available on the website if it helps some people out. Speaking of templates, I'm also thinking about doing a template on where to install your lower bag cup, the Velaworks do-it-yourself front slam kit, where to mount that cup. So it'd be a template that I send you similar to a simple guide that you cut out and place on your lower control arm that would show you exactly where to cut out that hole in your lower control arm. So if you think that would be helpful, post in the comments and I'll work on both of those things and have that available to you guys to use. Hey, thanks again for sticking around to the end of the video. On the next video, we'll be installing the notch bridge and a bunch of this TenWorks parts right here. The trailing arms, the air slam at 2,500 bags, how to mount those up. So a lot more to come. And in case you didn't see it, on my Instagram, I bought a 1960 Chevrolet Apache, and I'll tell you all about the plans that's coming for that truck. I'm super excited about it. It's got awesome patina. It's on its way here right now from Kansas. So we'll see it when it gets here. I'll unveil it to the world. I'll make an introductory video. We'll do a walk around, so stick around for that. If you've got a 60 to 62 truck, that's the X-frame torsion bar truck, and you're figuring out how do I bag this thing, stay tuned for that. Thank you again. All these parts are available on my website, simpleC10.co.